Welcome to today's webcast. This call is being recorded, and now to begin the program, I'd like to introduce Chris Flack.
Hey, thank you so much, Kayla, and welcome everybody in our audience to today's webcast, Reimagining Legacy Information Management and Protection, sponsored by StorageCraft. I'm Chris Flack with Redmond Magazine, and I'm here to be your host for today's event. So thank you all for joining. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to always join us for our webcasts. So thank you so much. Just a few quick reminders before we get started with today's call. So just a few quick things to get out of the way. First things first is we are recording today's event for future viewing and listening purposes. We'll send you a link within about 24 to 48 hours once the webcast is over where you can view the replay. Feel free to share that link with coworkers, colleagues, friends, anybody who may be interested on today's topic. We would appreciate that. You can also go down to the dock of your screen right now, click on the little paper airplane icon, send an email to a friend or a coworker who may be interested on the topic, and they can join you in the console. You'll have a nice little private chat area. It's quite a bit of fun, so please feel free to use that feature. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end of today's call. We encourage you at any point to enter your question via the Ask a Question box on the left-hand side of your console. Hopefully, if time permits, we'll get to everybody's questions and get out some answers. If we don't get to your question during the call today, don't take offense. We'll make sure that somebody gets back in touch with you once the call is over. We'll send your email and your name directly to people at StorageCraft so they can do that. Joining us for today's webcast, we have a really great presenter. His name is Sean Darrington. Sean joined StorageCraft through the Exablocks acquisition and has more than 20 years of storage experience. Sean is most recently from Veritas Symantec and has held multiple product marketing and management positions covering storage management, cloud, and virtualization solutions. Before Veritas, he was the lead storage analyst at Metagroup. He holds a BS in Material Science and Engineering and a BS in Engineering and Public Policy, both from Carnegie Mellon University. And without any further ado, I will let Sean take the floor to get started. So please, why don't you get started, my friend?
Great. Thanks, Chris. And welcome, everybody, and good afternoon or good morning, depending upon what time zone you're in. As Chris said, I'm Senior Director of Product Management for the Exablocks portfolio. And for those that are familiar with StorageCraft and the success we've had in the data protection space, Exablocks is, we're happy to join the team early this year when StorageCraft acquired Exablocks. And so today, what I wanted to do is share with everybody a little about what Exablocks has been focused on for solving storage challenges, particularly around information management and protection, but also touch on what we are able to do with Shadow Protect and combining the data protection solutions and the software with the storage solutions that Exablocks has. So with that, let me jump in. Just for those that have been in the storage industry for a long time or even a short time, you're very familiar with this conundrum where the limitations of traditional legacy storage is one of a challenge for capacity planning and procurement, where oftentimes you have a project called virtualization or physical storage, email, archiving, backups, take your pick. You have a storage problem you're trying to solve, and oftentimes you have to size that over a couple-year period because in a scale-up solution, you have to choose the small, medium, or large version of take your pick of a vendor because of a pair of RAID controllers supports a certain number of disk drives, and you need a certain amount of capacity, but you have to compare that to the performance requirements as well as the availability. And so there's a big guessing game that happens in terms of how much storage you're going to need over a 36-month period where you want to get the best buying power. But at the same time, you don't want to overbuy ahead of when you need, but you don't want to underbuy to pay more at any point in time. But one thing is guaranteed is that at the end of that, you're oftentimes going to be faced with a forklift upgrade. And for those that have been performing forklift upgrades in the past, from even moving within a vendor's portfolio of the small version to the medium version over time, it's not a pleasant experience, particularly if you're moving across one vendor to another. But at any point in time, initially the storage is really over-provisioned, and at some point in time that capacity is utilized, and you kind of grow into the small, medium, or large version. And ideally you've chosen the correct one over that time period. But it's not as flexible as if you look at a scale-out storage solution. So what Exablocks has is a portfolio of storage solutions that you can scale with exactly the storage that you need over the period of time that what you're looking for. So you can start with a simple 30 terabyte deployment. It could be 10 terabytes. It could be 100 terabytes. Whatever that number is, you start with exactly what you need. And over time, as your requirements change and your capacity demand increases, you can satisfy that requirement by scaling out and adding additional one blocks to an existing cluster. And you're provisioning resources throughout that life cycle, and all the while, you're not reconfiguring your applications. You don't change how the end users access their file shares or map network drives. You simply just continue to scale it over time. So at this point, you're actually purchasing storage in real time, and at the end, you're not faced with a forklift upgrade. The Scaleout solution allows you to add the next generation 3 years from now, and you can retire the hardware that you bought today 36 months from now by simply removing it from the cluster, and all the while that pool of storage is just available. So what we've done is deliver this Scaleout solution, which in general is not unique because there are others in the industry that have done this. EMC's Isilon is probably one of the better examples, certainly a higher-end solution for this, but it's a Scaleout storage solution. The difference that Exablocks has taken is that we've not built our Scaleout architecture on legacy 30, 35-year-old technology of block stores, right? So RAID volumes and LUNs, you carve up these block stores, and storage vendors either present Fiber Channel or iSCSI as a block interface to the applications, or they present NFS and SMB to file-serving applications, right? It could be VMware as well, but just a file-based access to a block store, right? Very limited, very conducive to a traditional scale-up architecture. This is the same architecture that Isilon uses and some of the others. There are ways that you can kind of get around and have a faux layer, if you will, for scaling out storage. But really the architecture of the future is object storage. And this is what a lot of the cloud scale companies, Google, Facebook, Amazon S3, they all have a distributed object store. This allows organizations to use commodity components to have a pool of storage that you can grow over time, and all the while that object store can literally be infinite in size. It can be a couple terabytes, it can be multiple petabytes, it can be hundreds of petabytes. Now it's up to the storage to present those objects to applications, which oftentimes many vendors have RESTful APIs, right? Amazon S3, if you're going to replicate storage from on-premises into S3, you have to communicate via the S3 API. That is not what something, in particular about 90% of the on-premises applications, VMware and Azure and others, all communicate via, right? But what Exablocks has done is we've distributed the same architecture in terms of an object store, but tightly coupled that with file and folder access. So now we look like an SMB and NFS file system, but at the same time, you have all the advantages of an object store. And what that allows you to do is scale out over time and have a pool of storage that's a object, but you hide all that complexity from the applications by providing these microservices, in this case SMB and NFS, to a distributed content addressable object store. So you have all the benefits of a cloud scale storage architecture, but you have none of the complexities. You can literally drop this into your environment, and in a matter of 5, 10, 15 minutes, depending upon how fast you are configuring the network, you have immediate access to what looks like legacy scale-out network-attached storage. But you're in a next-gen architecture. You're in an architecture that supports different microservices to be added over time through software updates, but having access to that same pool of storage. So we've taken that core building block of the OneBlock's storage hardware and software solution and delivered that in an appliance form factor. But we've also focused on really how are we going to give you as a storage admin or network admin as much time back as possible. And that's one of the things where we focused on OneSystem, which is our cloud-based management service. OneSystem is you literally go to onesystem.exablocks.com to manage all of your storage. And here you see a small screenshot with the number of different OneBlocks clusters. These clusters can be in the same location. They can be in multiple locations either throughout the United States, geographically dispersed worldwide. It does not matter. And you're able to manage all of their storage worldwide from any browser. If you're an organization that for either security and compliance, or if you're an organization, for example, in the public sector that has no internet access to from your data center, you can actually deploy OneSystem as a virtual machine via a container in your environment. It allows you the same management capabilities to manage all the different clusters within your network and across multiple locations, all through that same interface. However, it's distributed individually within your virtual machine. So now you can log into that virtual machine, same browser access, but now it's on your premises and in a VM. Looking at the cloud-based management capabilities of OneSystem, we are able to, as a company, provide better support visibility into your organization. So we know, as a company, StorageCraft knows every disk drive, the status of every network interconnect and power supply of OneBlocks that all of our customers are using worldwide. So there's a lot of proactive monitoring in terms of drive health, predictive drive failures, environmental controls that we have that allow us to provide better support services in addition to obviously accessing our support organization, having secure access to the storage in the event that something is going wrong. Most of the tasks within OneSystem actually require zero configuration. So things like remote replication can be done in 3 mouse clicks. Things like replacing a disk drive or adding storage can all be done with zero configuration. So for those that have been in the storage industry for a while and used to the typical and traditional storage management interfaces, lots of command line operations, trying to figure out the syntax and going to weeks of storage training, you will not find that with Exablocks. Most of the storage is done via point and click. In fact, as a last line defense, you do have remote management for lights out control where you can configure networks via command line, but everything else is point and click. So we've tried to make it as straightforward, but yet as powerful for organizations to use when you start to look at how we're going to give as much time back to you as possible for managing storage. And so that's where we've really focused on making the Scaleout solution easy to use and easy to start with what you're looking for and today's requirements and grow into what your organization does over time. So this is one of the things where looking at failure domains, this is something that we take into account without any admin intervention. And so when I said you can start with the storage exactly as you need, you can start with as few as a single OneBlocks and as few as 3 disk drives technically. From a performance perspective, you're probably looking at either 6 or 8 or probably 12 drives. But from a technical perspective, you could start with, and we do have some customers doing this, as little as 3 disk drives and then OneBlocks. But as you are writing out that information, we're looking at different failure domains, right? Within a single OneBlocks, you can have a drive failure, so we protect against that. But within a cluster, you can also have OneBlocks node failures, so we protect against that. And as you grow over time, because we're a distributed object store, we automatically redistribute those objects as necessary throughout the cluster, again, without admin intervention on your part, to protect against the greatest failure domain. So in a single OneBlocks, it's at the drive level. In a multi-node cluster, it's at the node level. But then you also have the opportunity across multiple clusters, across multiple locations. And so these are all things that are dynamically done and transparent to the applications because of our software portfolio. And so for those that are looking at enterprise-class features like inline deduplication and compression, these are all things that we deliver as part of the storage solution. So depending upon your application use case, you're going to be able to get very good data reduction ratios. You're going to be able to store a lot more information on the same amount of storage as if you were to do it in a traditional Blockstore implementation. But we also have things that are just, again, done without admin intervention, like continuous data protection. So every 10 seconds, we're taking a snapshot of that file system. The question is, how long do you want to keep those snapshots? And that's just a click and drag and drop option for a slider that says I want to keep it for an hour, a day, 7 years, or forever. And there are lots of, obviously, choices in between that. But these are all enterprise-class features that oftentimes you can't find in a scale-out storage solution that is targeted really for every organization as opposed to only the largest organizations. We also take an approach, because we don't have a block store, because we're not tied to legacy LUNs and volumes, we have flexibility in how we're going to distribute objects across multiple failure domains, as I just spoke about. And the way we do this is by creating multiple replicas of those objects. So we protect against 2 drive failures by creating 3 copies of every object. And that means that in a single OneBlocks, you can have 2 drive failures and still have access to your data. In a cluster of 7, as you see here on the slide, you can still have 2 drive failures and have access to your data in the cluster. But you can also, again, because of that failure domain, actually have 2 OneBlocks failures and lose all 24 drives in those 2 OneBlocks. And in this example of a cluster of 7, that file system is still available to your applications and users. The data is still available, and we will begin to rebuild those objects that are on the 2 failed OneBlocks in the background. If they come back online, we know those objects, we know where everyone is, and we begin to optimize the layout at that point. Those things are all done without admin intervention. As an example, if a drive fails, an admin doesn't have to take any task or any action for us to begin to get that health back to protecting against another drive failure. So you have 3 copies of every object again. Now, as an admin, if you did want to replace a drive, and eventually you will want to replace that failed drive, you literally just pull it out of the appliance and slide it in a new capacity drive. It could be the same. It could be a larger capacity drive. But there's no action on your part to do this. And so these are all things that are simple yet powerful techniques that we're able to take advantage of because of our distributed object store. The other thing that we've done that's unique is we've kept the cost of the acquisition, the cost of storage, as low as possible. So all of Exablox and StorageCraft's intellectual property is really in our software. So we sell an appliance. We don't sell the disk drives that go along with that appliance. There is no value between us putting an 8 terabyte Seagate drive versus an 8 terabyte HDST drive, right? That's really up to Seagate and HDST to innovate there. So you're not going to see, from a pricing perspective, StorageCraft and Exablox selling drives at 5 to 8 times the markup of what you can purchase at retail pricing. You, as an organization, have the opportunity to purchase storage through either normal retail means, Amazon or Newegg, or take your pick of SHI or PC Mall, take your pick of online distributor, or you can purchase through your partner as well. That's something that allows you to keep the costs of storage low, but yet still have the same reliability, the same, as an example, the Seagate 8 terabyte Enterprise HDD, 7200 RPM drive that you can purchase for $450 is not going to cost you $3,000 from other legacy storage vendors. So from a hardware perspective, the 4312 is one of the models that you are able to use really for capacity-based applications. And you can have up to 12 8 terabyte drives, and you can mix and match the capacity of drives. You can also mix the type of drives within a single one box, but also across multiple one blocks in a ring. So as you scale out storage today, if you start with 3 one blocks and 2 years from now you want to add more storage, you can add the then current one blocks model into the existing cluster, and maybe that's using 10 and 12 terabyte drives based upon your needs at that point. And that cluster, that pool of storage, is just now increased from 3 4312s with 96 terabytes each, as an example, to adding 2 more one blocks of the then current model in 24 months from now with 10 terabyte drives. And that pool of storage has just increased. So all these software capabilities that have been speaking about in terms of data reduction ratios and compression and deduplication, snapshotting, remote replication, all the software runs on multiple one blocks hardware. And so there's 2 different options based upon your performance and your application requirements. The 4212 really focused on the capacity-based application, but also the 5210, which is our all-flash scale-out storage solution. And this is really changing not only the feature and function available for storage solutions, but it's also changing the economics of what we can do. And so now you have the benefits of scale-out storage, but yet now you can satisfy the performance requirements of many of the virtual environments or data protection as well, how fast you need that application recovered in the event of a failure. And so the 5210 is a 1U appliance. You can, again, mix and match capacity as well as types of solid-state drives. This is something where we support up to 4 terabyte drives, so 1, 2, and 4 terabyte are the most popular. Different Samsung models between the TLC and MLC versions, as well as Intel, are options for compatibility used with the 5210. But similar to what I was discussing with regards to the hard drives and the 8 terabyte hard drives at about $450 or so, solid-state drives are also you can also use solid-state drives at retail pricing. So as an example, depending upon the type of solid-state drive and how many drive write per days you're looking at between 40 and 80 cents a gig. So for a 4 terabyte SSD, you're looking at about $2,500, $2,800. Now that's a significant decrease from what you would find from 3PAR or ENCXIO, or take your pick of other all-flash storage vendors. And again, what that means is you have the benefit and the performance of 50,000 IOPS in a single 1U, but you also have, based upon the capacity and the data reduction, that delta coming down significantly to about the 40 to 50 cents per gig effective. So now where you may have always wanted to use flash but never have been able to afford it, that now changes the economics, right? So now you can begin to use an all-flash solution in different scenarios. And so what I wanted to do for the remainder of the time now with a little bit of a level set in terms of introduction about OneSystem and the cloud-based management, the two different models between the 4212 one blocks and the 5210 all-flash model, is to really focus on kind of three different use cases and where we see most people using the different storage architectures. So the first is to look at the data protection side. So this is something that Exablocks has been doing for a long time in our partnerships with StorageCraft, Veeam, Commvault. The list goes on of backup applications that you can use to back up to a cluster. And that cluster is on your premises. It could be a cluster in San Francisco's example here of a 7-node 5210 cluster. And that's protecting all of your engineering applications for primary storage, but also as a Veeam target, right? And that can be replicating off-site to New York. Now, you'll notice that VMware is also a share on New York that is not being replicated back to San Francisco. And so that New York cluster, which is actually a 4212 cluster, so it's capacity-based, that replication does not need to be sent to similar hardware configurations. You have that flexibility not only in terms of the capacity, a 7-node cluster going to a 5-node cluster, but the type of one block, so an all-flash going to an HDD-based one blocks. These are all things that you have the flexibility on a per-share basis to decide what's going to be replicated from one location to another. In each case, a share is read-write in one location, and it can be replicated to another one blocks cluster in a different location as read-only. Now, at the same time, you have that flexibility not only to go one direction, San Francisco to New York, but now you can look at New York is replicating VMware back to San Francisco. And now Denver is also in the mix for a third location where we have StorageCraft and ShadowProtect backup targets going from Denver to San Francisco. So you have that flexibility to do a one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many architecture, depending upon if you're an organization with multiple sites or if you're a managed service provider and you're doing backup recovery services for the 50 law firms in New York and southern Manhattan. All those law firms can have a one blocks on premises for file serving or backup recovery and data protection coming back to a colo for you, right? So that's kind of the option as far as local data protection, remote disaster recovery. But at StorageCraft, we also have an opportunity for disaster recovery as a service. And so this is where you can use ShadowProtect to protect the applications in Denver locally, right? So you can do the quick recovery that way. You can replicate those to San Francisco for your off-site DR, but you also have the opportunity to take San Francisco or Denver into our cloud where you're able to actually recover those applications and actually run the applications and the recovery in our cloud. So it's a very different type of recovery as opposed to doing on-premises. If the server goes down, if the site goes down, you now have a separate infrastructure that StorageCraft is hosting to do that recovery. So from a data protection side of things, you have the flexibility to do local on-premises, remote disaster recovery, and or cloud-based disaster recovery as a service. And again, because we are object-based, you really only have to worry about the pool of storage that you're managing locally, where that's going to be replicated to, and what your performance requirements are for data protection and, more importantly, recovery. In the event of recovery with ShadowProtect and a feature we call Virtual Boot, you can literally boot a VM in recovery mode in 30 seconds or less. And so it's now completely changing the game in terms of how fast you can get that recovery time objective and how short that can be with the opportunity to use all flash as opposed to an HDD-based recovery solution. So the next area that I wanted to share with you and talk a little about was virtual servers. So this is something that obviously 90% of organizations are using today in their environment with the VMware or Hyper-V for that matter. Right? With a one-blocks architecture, we are exporting an NFS or SMB share. In this case, I just have NFS data store for VMware as an example, but it can certainly be an SMB share for Hyper-V as well. But because of our Scaleout architecture, when you create that NFS data store, and on the left-hand side, you're starting with 10 terabytes, and you're going to expand over time, growing to 700 terabytes on the far right, that data store that you configure, when you add that additional storage over time, there is no reconfiguration for that data store. All the VMDKs that you're mapping to that data store simply see more storage over time, and it's literally a matter of seconds as you add that additional storage for VMware to recognize the data store has more capacity. Now all the VMDKs can consume that. There is no notion of thin provisioning, nor is there a requirement for thin provisioning data stores within VMware because of our architecture, as well as there's no single limit on a per file or a data store limit, right? So we will support as large as VMware does. 64 terabytes is often the limitation, depending upon what version you're on. But you can have if you want to create a 10 terabyte data store and you want to add an NFS quota to that, you can do that, or you can let it go to a full 64 terabytes, and that single data store will be as large as VMware supports. The same is true from the initial setup, right? We will support whatever files you need. So if your backup and recovery infrastructure is going to write out a 5 terabyte file, you don't have to worry about a legacy file system that is based on Blockstore and a journal-based file system to have a 1 terabyte limit or a 500 gig limit, depending upon whichever vendor you're looking at. It can be as large as you need it to be to support your environment. From the initial setup, both the 4312 and the 5210 I mentioned run the same software. So the setup and the procedure is exactly the same, where you're simply connecting power, network, and drives and turning it on. From there, everything is configured for you. The only thing you need to enter is if you're going to change the network settings, if you're on a DHCP network, or if you need to assign a static IP address. Those are the only things you need to do. There's nothing about formatting the drives. There's no question about formatting file systems. That all happens transparently and behind the scenes for you. Similarly, when you're adding storage, in this example of moving from 10 terabytes to 300 terabytes, you literally just turn on the next 2 1 blocks in the cluster. If they're on the same network, they discover the first 1 blocks that you originally had. That storage is recognized. The cluster membership changes from 1 to 3. That pool of storage is just now increased to 300 terabytes, and you haven't configured a single thing. You haven't had to change your application. The VMDKs simply see more storage, and you're done. Right? It is literally that simple to do. And so when you start to look at common deployments of virtual desktops as well, you now have the option to leverage different storage architectures based upon your requirements. So for example, on the left-hand side here, you can have a 3-node cluster that's serving out for your, in this case, let's use VMware. For View, you can have your apps and operating systems for the users to boot off of on an all-flash cluster. You can also have, if you need high performance for your home directories, you can have those sitting on the side in a 5-node cluster. They can be in the same or they can be separate clusters, totally up to you. And different, depending upon your architecture, you can do that. You can have those home directories sitting, instead of on a 5-node 5210 all-flash cluster, they could be sitting on a 3-node 4312 cluster because you don't need the high performance of all-flash. You want to be a little bit more cost-conscious. You can do that. And you can have that home directory cluster replicating off-site to another one. And so depending on your performance and capacity requirements, you can think about an all-flash cluster or a capacity-based cluster in one or multiple locations. And this is something that many of our customers are doing today. Whether or not they're using the all-flash version for the apps and the VDI, a lot of organizations use the 4312 as the capacity for their home directories, right? And now they have all the benefits of the unstructured data that I'll talk about in just a moment. But they also have the benefit of pricing, which is analogous to Amazon S3 pricing in terms of 2 to 3 cents per gig per month as you look at your 36-month cost. So these are all things that you have as an organization or as a partner for delivering to your customers that flexibility to match the price, performance, and capacity that they need. And when you look at unstructured data, the clusters that we've been talking about in terms of virtual clusters, or if you're looking at the data protection, the Scaleout storage solution of OneBlocks is really suited for multiple use cases in terms of that same storage can be used as primary storage for unstructured data, but it can also be a backup target for Shadow Protect. And that same pool of storage can then be replicated off-site for protection. And going back to the multi-site replication I was talking about before, you really think about things differently where you don't have to tie down your capacity planning to each individual application. You can really plan across the portfolio based upon your use cases. And as you look at how you can potentially reduce some of your costs, in this case I've got a number of, again, 5210 all-flash clusters, but for scaling and looking at different storage policies, this is where you support different types of application uses. So within each storage cluster, you have the opportunity to create a share for file serving or for a backup target or for an archiving target for that matter, right? And here I've got a couple examples of your virtual machine repository, but then also your clones of the VDI, right, for local data protection where you're doing snaps of those clones. And on a per-share basis, you get to decide what type of deduplication you'd like to use based upon those applications. So for backup recovery, using a variable length, which is going to increase your data reduction ratios, or for file serving, maybe fixed length is fine, right? And that's typically what people use. You can turn compression on or off. You can set your continuous data protection, so the continuous snapshots to be on or off, as well as how long you'd like to keep them, and whether you'd like to remotely replicate that to one location or multiple locations or not at all. And so really thinking about things differently on a per-share basis, what types of storage policies do you want to apply for those applications? And when you start to look at things for compliance, as an example, with HIPAA, for file serving, for backup recovery, you also have the opportunity to determine whether you want to have encryption at rest at the cluster level. So an entire cluster can have all that information encrypted before it's written to the disk drives. So when a disk drive fails, if you send it away for warranty, your information is not going to be readable by anybody because they don't have that passphrase. So the encryption is going to prevent access from other people that you don't want to have access to. Right? At the same time, as you look at the file serving example, this is where a lot of organizations have been able to take advantage of the OneBlock's architecture to scale as they need to, as I mentioned before, but also protect against ransomware. And the advantages of having a OneBlock for a file server is you don't have to have Windows servers running as VMs or Windows servers running on physical servers for that matter. But a lot of organizations have Windows virtual machines consuming their SAN storage. And most organizations don't need that level of performance of SAN storage, so they can actually offload that onto a OneBlock's architecture. With OneBlock's, you have that opportunity to integrate with Active Directory. You can manage permissions the same way you do with Windows systems at the file, folder, or individual share level. You can set SMB quotas if you want to. You can do access-based enumeration depending upon how you manage those files. Not every organization does ABE. But you can also customize that snapshot retention based upon different groups. So you can have a share of home directories set up for finance versus general user population. You may have finance snapshots set to 7 years for compliance, but everybody else set to 1 year or 1 month. Completely flexible to you, again, on a per-share basis. And from a ransomware perspective, obviously, there are multiple things that can happen when you're going to be, when you're infected with ransomware. So you do need to think about the physical network security perimeter, obviously having antivirus running, et cetera. And so having a comprehensive data protection strategy is required. So you can recover from a backup as necessary. But in this case, with file serving and OneBlock, you can actually recover, and we've had, unfortunately, a number of customers been infected with ransomware, but they've actually been able to recover themselves from the infection just by looking at the previous versions of those files via our continuous data protection. So because we take snapshots every 10 seconds, this is different than traditional or legacy volume-based snapshots. Our snapshots, and because we're a distributed object store, these are actually immutable. So snapshots cannot be disabled like VSS. Ransomware is morphing to the point where it can not only disable Windows VSS, but it can also delete those snapshots. With us and our architecture, that information is always protected. It will be there, and you can actually recover up to the last 10 seconds, but you can also have different recovery points daily or weekly or monthly over that length of your retention period. So your users, or you as an administrator within the help desk, you can hide the snapshot folder if you want to, and you can recover your user's PC by just right mouse Windows previous version. You can pull out an individual file, individual folder, or an entire share for all of your users on the mapped network drive. If your ransomware actually goes out and discovers all of your user mapped drives and gets everything, you can recover an entire share as well. So I mentioned earlier that a number of our customers had been infected with ransomware, but fortunately none of them had to actually pay that ransom to recover their information. It's also important to note that one of the best practices that we're recommending is to actually have Snapshot enabled for your backup recovery application. Depending upon the sophistication of that ransomware attack, we have had customers where their backups were also encrypted and held at ransom. And so if you have snapshots on your backup files also enabled in addition to the file share, now you can get your backups back in addition to getting individual files and folders back. So those are some of the things that we've been focusing on in terms of, number one, how do you really reimagine and rethink storage to deliver different requirements for unstructured data, virtual servers, or data protection, right? At the same time, we've also changed the economics and the model of using commodity components, bringing your own drives at retail pricing, and really delivering enterprise-class software features that's affordable and available for every organization and every partner that StorageCraft works with. So with that, I know there have been a few questions that have come in. If anybody does have additional questions, feel free to submit that in the Q&A box. But with that, Chris, let me turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. Much appreciated. Thank you for your presentation. I will give you a second here to kind of catch your breath and as we get into the Q&A session here. So take a second there, Sean. For those of you in the audience, if you haven't already entered your question, please feel free to do so at this time. We'd appreciate it. And if you don't think of anything now and you think of something later, you could always log back into the console and submit your question, and it still gets sent over to the people at StorageCraft. So, so don't feel bad if you can't think of anything now. Okay, so let's see here. We've got a couple questions in the queue. The first one is asking, Sean, can I use any drive with OneBlox?
Yeah, a good question, and the answer is both nearly yes and no. And I'll qualify that by looking at the 4312 model. So the hard drives, we support nearly every 3.5-inch hard drive. The big difference is going to be from a performance perspective. We really recommend the 7200 RPM drives from different manufacturers. I mean, it could be Seagate, could be HST, could be Western Digital. But we really encourage organizations not to use 5400 RPM drives or Seagate SMR, that are really the active archive drive, as it's called. Those drives are not designed for performance and really is not going to meet most expectations there. On the 5210 with the solid-state drives, it's not every SSD because there are much larger differences between SSD manufacturers, life, longevity, drive write per day, and performance, as well as in the event of failure if those writes are persistent or not based upon the SSD itself, not the software above it. So having said that, with the SSDs and the 5210, Samsung and Intel are the two manufacturers in addition to Toshiba as well, the PX04. So there are different models there. So as you're interested in that, we do have a compatibility list for the SSDs, and on our website, we do have the HDD recommendation. So almost any drive, but not every drive.
Question here for you. This audience member is asking, does the backup software come with OneBlox, or do I need to purchase that separately?
Yeah, good question. The backup software, like for example Shadow Protect, that is not included in the purchase of OneBlox. We do have a number of marketing promotions that are going on as far as purchasing a OneBlox as well as receiving Shadow Protect software. But as far as like on an ongoing basis, it's not included in the OneBlox purchase. Some people think about snapshots as backup software because that scenario I was mentioning where you have a OneBlox cluster and it's a target for Shadow Protect for the virtual machines and those applications. And then you're doing all the file serving as well on the OneBlox. You actually don't need to back up the files of unstructured data that we are snapshotting, assuming you're replicating them off-site, because of our continuous snapshots. So some people think about that as backup software, but if you're thinking about Shadow Protect, if you're thinking about Veeam and Commvault, that level of software, that's not included with the purchase of OneBlox. But as I mentioned, we do have some marketing bundles and promotions right now if you are interested for free Shadow Protect licenses with the purchase of OneBlox.
Question here, what protocols do you support? Do you support ISCSI?
Yeah, iSCSI. So a couple things. So I'm just going to jump back to this slide here just to show everybody. So one of the things is that our architecture is extensible to running different microservices on the top So file systems, SMB, NFS is what we support today. And all those microservices have access to the distributed object store underneath the covers. So iSCSI is on the roadmap. You'll see other protocols as well, probably S3-like APIs as well. But those are all going to be additional microservices that are on the top half of our architecture, and it's something that is very flexible. But today, NFS SMB, iSCSI is next.
Got a question here. How much deduplication and data reduction can I expect?
That's a good question. That's similar to the how long is it going to take me to replicate my data over my network? There are a lot of variables that influence and impact that answer. Couple things to note. It'll largely be for backup recovery. You're going to see the best data reduction ratios because you're backing up the same information over and over. In terms of your full and the monthlies, et cetera, depending upon your schedule. However, depending upon the software architecture and the job scheduling, you may not see as high of data reduction as you would in others. So for example, with Shadow Protect, we do incrementals every 15 minutes. So you're not doing a full every day or every week with incrementals in between, so your data reduction is going to, your deduplication is going to be less than if you're doing a traditional weekly full with daily incrementals. But we have customers that are using us for backup targets. They're seeing 20 to 1. On average, I would estimate more in the 5 to 1 range. For primary storage of unstructured data, you can think 2 or 3 to 1. So very quickly, you're getting back to the scenario of the additional protection of different failure domains of 96 terabytes of raw storage with 3 copies of objects to protect against drive failures or one-box failures. You're looking at about 32 terabytes of storage. Well, now that gets you back up to 96 terabytes of effective storage with a 3 to 1 data reduction. And obviously, if you're above that, now you're going above 100% of your effective storage, where you're looking at 200% and 300%, et cetera. But it really will depend upon your application data. We have customers using the 4212 for video archiving. That's not going to compress, nor will it dedupe. So your mileage will vary, but it will be those are some of the estimates in terms of the application workloads for backup and unstructured.
We've got a question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
We got a question here from an audience member. They're asking, when using some of the basic drives that don't necessarily have smart reporting, are SNMP traps recorded and sent with failures, bad spots developed, etc.? Yeah,
so with regard to that, there are a couple of things, and I'm glad you mentioned the bad sectors and everything, because that's one thing I didn't jump into kind of the deeper technical side. But with our distributed object store, you're guaranteed to get the same information back to your application regardless of what the disk drive does. Undetectable bit error rates or bit rot, those are all things that can corrupt file systems, where the file system thinks it's getting back what it actually wrote to the disk drive, but it's actually getting something different. With our object architecture, that object is actually a hash. It's a 64-bit hash, and that hash has to match what we originally wrote to the disk drive before it's sent back to the application. So for drives that are basic in nature, they don't have good reporting. They may have bit rot that they don't report based upon read sector failures, et cetera. We won't return corrupt data back to the application. So that's kind of one part of the answer. The second is that within OneSystem, we do look at the additional drive failure, predictive failures that go above and beyond a bit of what SMART does, but not HDDs have behaved differently. So it's kind of a little bit of a longer answer to that question, Chris, but with regards to getting the information back and when a drive fails, we do as much as we can to predict that. But in the event that it does fail, you will still get the original content back based upon our object architecture.
Excellent, thanks. We've got a question here. This person is asking, how much does one box typically cost?
Good question. So there's two different prices for the different models, as you would expect. The U.S. list price for the 4212 is $12,995 without drives, and that's for a network connection, 10 gig network connection with SFP+. The OneBlox 5210 model is the all-flash version, and that list price is $28,995 without any SSDs. With that, I've kept the pricing very simple for the OneBlocks. There's a purchase price of the OneBlocks, and then there's subscription services for OneSystem, which is the software updates, the way you manage the storage, as well as service and support for your environment. And then there are 2 other subscription services, remote replication and encryption at rest. All of those are metered per OneBlocks. So if you're going to have 3 OneBlocks in one location and 3 in the other, it's a quantity of 6 for everything. So I've kept it very straightforward for organizations to plan from a budget perspective, but also for our partner community to transact with their customers and be able to deliver that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sean. We've plowed through all the questions here at the end of the webcast today, so thank you so much for answering the questions. And like I said, don't feel bad if you couldn't think of anything now. You could feel free to submit it during the replay broadcast of this webcast. You could log back in later. Submit your question then. But thank you all so much for participating in today's webcast. Sean, thank you so much for your presentation. But everybody, thank you for joining us for today's webcast. Today's webcast has been sponsored by StorageCraft and brought to you by RedmondMag.com. Thank you all for attending, and I know we'll have some StorageCraft webcasts coming up in the future, so please feel free to sign up for those as well. So thank you so much all for attending today's presentation. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.